First, as part of the innate immune system, dendritic cells, particularly plasmacytoid dendritic cells or PDCs, secrete interferons, which are local hormones produced by some immune cells and cells which have been infected by virus, which stimulate neighboring cells to produce antiviral proteins, which will combat viral infection and other types of infections as well. Hundreds of genes are upregulated in response to interferons. These proteins were named for their ability to interfere with viral infections. If dendritic cells became infected with coronavirus, once again, they do express intermediate levels of ACE2 receptors, then viral proteins would be produced within the dendritic cell and be known as endogenous ligands. These would then bind cell fingerprint proteins, the MHC or major histocompatibility complex 1 proteins. And these MHC proteins would transport the viral peptide, a portion of the protein, to the cell surface where they could interact with cytotoxic T lymphocytes of the adaptive immune response and then trigger these cells which can destroy infected cells and further activate parts of adaptive immunity. Dendritic cells are also capable of stimulating cells of the adaptive immune system using exogenous ligands, ligands which did not originate from inside the dendritic cell because of an infection, but rather which they have absorbed, say, at an infection site. A dendritic cell could approach an area where cells are dying or infected and perform phagocytosis, perhaps of cellular debris, of dead cells, or of infected cells. And then they could then have inside them viral proteins which were produced in other host cells, not the dendritic cells, so exogenous ligands. These viral proteins could be broken into peptides, which are then attached to MHC2 proteins here in green as opposed to blue. These then travel to the cell membrane, and MH2 proteins present to a different kind of immune cell, the helper T cells. And so this would activate them, and the helper T cells could then stimulate the cytotoxic T cells or the B lymphocytes, which produce antibodies. One of the things that makes dendritic cells so important is that unlike most immune cells that might be presenting antigens to lymphocytes, these cells can actually move. They can enter lymphatic vessels, travel to lymph nodes where they encounter the areas where lymphocytes are being trained and where they are maturing. So dendritic cells can actually bring information about infections going on in the periphery to these training sites of lymphocytes and help guide the development of immune cells, particularly the lymphocytes, which not only are involved in the cytotoxic response, but also which then produce antibodies. Not only are dendritic cells critical in the immune response, but also they are the major antigen presenting cells present in the lungs, where they may be among the first to encounter the respiratory virus, coronavirus. And so thus they are critical in the body's exposure and reaction to coronavirus. And given that they may themselves be capable of being infected, or they may be able to transmit the virus carrying it on the DC sign receptor to lymph nodes, they then link the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system, which will include the production of antibodies against coronavirus.